Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be how to get better at titling your book. These tips will also apply to chapter titles and even short stories and perhaps even poems. So my first tip is going to sound very simple, but it is to practice. Just like writing a story is an art form that you get better at over time and over practice, titling also follows a similar vein. In order to get better at it, you must practice. This is why I actually recommend that writers who are writing novels title all of their chapters, even if they don't plan on using chapter titles for the published book. Nobody but you actually has to see them, but the reason I recommend it is because a lot of the times, if you're only titling every time you finish a novel, that means you're only titling maybe a few times a year, maybe once a year, maybe once every few years, which means that title muscle is not actually being exercised. So if you don't write shorter projects like short fiction or flash fiction or even poems, I would recommend titling your chapters. This will get you to actively do the tips I'm about to share. So here are actually a few of my titles from a few years ago, and I'll compare it with a few titles from recently. So the titles from about 5 or so years ago, these were my best ones. Finding the Non-Existent, She Saw a Boy, People That Lose, Losing the Shadows, Screams in My Family, Symbols in the Fog. Those were the best titles I came up with. I was probably just starting high school. These are my best titles from the last year or so. Slaughter the Animal, Blink Twice for Final Judgment, When the Flood Comes, Seventh Virtue, The Species is Dead, Feeding Habits. So my second tip is going to be avoid typical buzzwords. Of course, some of the words that I'm about to mention are actually pretty typical for some genre conventions. The words that I have personally come up with are love, star, moon, heart, glass, shatter, night, shine, star, death, fire, rain, shadow, dark, life, break, world, summer, dream, truth, soul, light, rose, dark, midnight, time, eyes, sky, blood, snow. I'll make sure to put that list in the description if I was reading it too fast. Why not these words in titles, Rachel? What do you have against these words? I actually think these are all great words, but notice that many of them are abstract. And if they are not abstract, they're very broad or even cliche. So look at the abstract, which is love, death, life, dream, truth, soul. These are all big, intangible concepts. And if they're not abstract, they are broad, like star, moon, heart, fire, world. And don't get me wrong, I love me some moon descriptions. I love the word moon. But the reason why I suggest moving away from these words is because they can actually make you rely on a lot of cliche poeticism that's already existed in titles before. A prof of mine actually was talking about some of these words. It was a different list. He didn't share all of them. The list that I shared was just some personal ones. But he was talking about his prof barred people from using certain words in poems. It's not because they were bad words or that using those words equal bad writing. It was because they're so often written about or used. If you're trying to truly get better at titles, moving away from some of these words, and again, it's not a hard and fast rule, can be a great way to start, as it encourages your brain to think more narrowly and specifically about the title, rather than in a super broad sense. These words are also often used in a poetic context and are also heavily romantic. See the word heart, for example. Because of that, this increases the melodrama that they intrinsically hold. Some people who've had a lot more practice with titles can still use the words mentioned, but in a more specific, new, fresh way. To me, a good title is specific and it indicates something about the book. So my next tip is to pay attention to everything. So this is a pre-title exercise, so something that you would have to do before you come up with a title, and this would be to really tune into words and phrases that interest you and to write them down as potential titles. What you notice can include a few things from your own writing, advertisements, signs, articles, and even labels or headlines. This does not mean plagiarize a phrase or a song or a book you like. Is this a phrase that belongs to like someone's intellectual properties? Someone actually came up with this, it's unique to them? Or is it something that's a little bit more general that isn't unique to a specific creator? It really sucks to have your titles copied because titles can't be copyrighted. I think it is best practice to kind of use your instinct on this one. If you know you're taking somebody's title and it is unique to their project, you've never heard that title before, don't use it. It's not cool. I've had my titles stolen many times, and it's not fair. So paying attention obviously takes a bit of luck, because sometimes you're not going to run into material that really catches your eye. However, when you do, write them down and start a document. This can actually become a running title list document that you can go to for inspiration to start new stories, or as inspiration for a new story that you need to title. The more you actively seek out cool phrases, the more you'll subconsciously notice them. So a few examples of the notice title is "For Your Safety, Please Hold On" by Kayla Zaga. This is a literal phrase that you'll see on like buses and public transit. Another example is "Next Year for Sure" by Zoe Lee Peterson. This is a phrase people say sometimes in real conversation. So the next tip is to look out for interesting words / phrases / sounds. This one goes hand in hand with the previous tip. Pay attention to words you like. So for example, chapter 5 of Mothward, which is a book that I wrote a year and a half ago or so, it's called Dead Disco because I like the word disco, and I also like the alliteration of dead before it. Dead disco. It sounds interesting. It seems like a contradiction because disco seems so lively and neon, and then dead is in front of it. So it just interested me to have that juxtaposition. So write down phrases you hear that interest you. That could include concepts you hear in a lecture hall, for example, if you're a student, or that you hear at a public speech, or if you're watching YouTube and you hear something in like a science video or something that really interests you. Pay attention to these things and write them down. An example of an interesting word / phrase / sound title would be "Soft Science" by Franny Choi. Soft science is an actual phrase used to describe fields of science, but it also features an alliteration that makes it sound a little more poetic. You can also alter known phrases to better suit your title and to make it more unique to you. So, for example, for my novel Seventh Virtue, the title comes from the phrase 7 virtues. Feeding habits is eating habits plus feeding behaviors smooshed together. So my next tip is to analyze the contents of your work. Could you page through the contents of a chapter or story to find an overarching theme, idea, or phrase that works as a title? So there are usually 3 types of titles you can mine from analyzing the contents of a chapter, and those are phrase titles, theme titles, or literal fact titles. Sometimes I'll be blessed while writing a chapter and type a few words that just sometimes become the epitome of the chapter, and it just has to be the title. This is where noticing really comes in. Usually we provide ourselves a lot more content to title stuff than we give ourselves credit for. We don't even realize how much title material we have at our disposal. Carefully read through the chapter or the book or the story. Do you see a line or a word or 2 words or 3 words, a phrase that could stand out as a title? And so an example of this is in Mothwork, there's a chapter called Picking Ritual. The minute I wrote Picking Ritual down, I was like, so that's the chapter title. She Is Also Dead is the name of my short story collection, and that's also a line. It's part of a line of a short story called The Wolf Antelope Will Not Come From Us. And then Joanne, I'll Pray For You is an adapted line from some dialogue that's spoken aloud. This is actually my most used method to title because it always conjures something. When you're looking for a chapter title or a story title or a novel title after the fact, you have so many words to look through, so many phrases to pull on that might actually have more thematic meaning than you realize. Does this work together? Does this work together? How does that make me feel? Does that work for the project? So a theme title now, if you're looking for a theme title, this doesn't necessarily mean using the theme of your book, like love or friendship, and like calling the book Love and Hate, for example, as the title, if those are your book's themes. You don't need to do that. But can you brainstorm a phrase that acts as a metaphor for the overarching theme of the book? So an example of this is Other Women by Nicola May Goldberg. That is the theme of the book. Another example is History of Wolves by Emily Fridland. It's one that holds thematic weight. If you just read the first chapter, you'll basically get a sense of why the book is called History of Wolves. So another version of thematic titles I wanted to mention are the thematic punch title. Sometimes it's not just enough to rely on the theme in your title. You can make an ordinary word hold so much more thematic weight depending on the contents of your book. That contents can actually deepen the meaning of the word you choose as your title. So these titles are usually much simpler, and they're oftentimes like 1-word titles, but they use the contents of the book to increase their meaning and to increase how interesting they are. So an example of this that I think is the best example I can find is Daddy by Emma Cline. There's a really great interview that Emma Cline did on the title of Daddy, and I think this one works really well because it holds holds a lot of cultural and also thematic to the stories. Wait, another one is Bunny by Mona Awad. So the next type of title is the literal fact title, and a literal fact title would be a phrase or word that reappears in the actual contents of the book multiple times. So this could be an idea or a location. Could also be a few other things, but usually I see it as an idea or a location. Often these literal facts are highly important either conceptually or thematically to the book. So an example is Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. So this is an actual thing in Ghost Wall. Ghost walls are an actual thing in this book. It's both thematic and literal. Another example is Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. So this is an actual place in the novel that is visited / spoken about multiple times. It's also highly thematic while also being literal. They actually go to Monkey Beach. Another example would be The Hunger Games. So this is an actual event that happens in the book. Seventh Virtue by Me. So this is a conceptual phrase that refers to the seventh magical family that correlate to the seventh virtue. It's pretty literal. So another tip I have is to turn to music or other art. I don't do this very often. This is how I actually named part 3 of Rewired, which is a book that I wrote many, many years ago. Gods by Nothing But Thieves really inspired me, and I was like, gods, that would be the perfect name for one of the parts. But you can look through lyrics, titles, album names, band names, etc. So you can sometimes inspire something. Though again, I don't often have luck doing this, and I also don't like taking other people's titles. So I'm conscious of what I pull and if it's pretty unique to the writer or artist. So my next tip for better titling is to go to Wikipedia or to do general research. So if I know a concept or theme that fits the title that I'm looking for, but it sounds kind of awkward as a title alone, I'll look up related concepts on Wikipedia and particularly check out the See Also section. Primary Organs, which is a short story of mine that was published in the Malahat Review, came from me looking at Wikipedia. I looked up like organ stuff, and the first thing that showed up was this Wikipedia article, and in the See Also it said primary organs, and I was like, oh my god, that makes so much sense thematically. This is a perfect phrase. I'm currently writing a chapter called Initial Condition in Feeding Habits, and I searched up the butterfly effect because I wanted to use that as a title, but I can't use the title butterfly effect because I watched that movie when I was a kid and it emotionally scarred me a little bit. But the first thing that like is in the definition, it says initial condition. I looked up what initial condition means and it works thematically. They also have a random article generator that I often click on randomly until I see something that interests me. General research can also be helpful for titling. When titling Holy Queen, which is chapter 6 of Mothwork, I knew I was looking for something with a religious connotation. I just didn't know exactly what. My critique partner suggested I title it after a Catholic prayer that mimics the tone of the chapter, and so that prayer ended up being Hail Holy Queen, which is modified just to Holy Queen. So my next tip is to subvert the normal, surprise us. Sometimes I might only be able to come up with a really literal, uncreative title because I'm not thinking in creative matters and I'm looking at the book in a really clinical way. So think about theme, sound, the way the word looks on the page, title length, syllables even, and rhythm. In this way, titling is a lot like writing a really short poem, which is why it's so hard. So an example of something that's subverting the normal, Death by Sex Machine by Franny Choi. We all know the phrase death by blah blah blah. Saying death by sex machine is so specific and unexpected that the title's immediately compelling. And so that title's one of my favorites because of how much it's doing in such a contained space and how it's subverting that phrase that we all know. Another example is Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Warsan Shire. I was not expecting, of course, kin to teach their own mother how to give birth. So my next tip is to get super specific. So while general titles can be impactful, like Daddy by Emma Klein, hyper-specific titles can also be a great way to brand your work. And they can also catch more of the attention of the reader because they are probably never seen before. Specific titles can be long or short, but I do find that they edge into the longer realm because that usually pins down more specificity. So what's something that you can pinpoint in your book that is specific to your work alone? These are titles that literally no one could brainstorm but you. This is a great technique for more advanced writers who have a handle on their writing style. It would be more difficult if you haven't been titling for very long or you haven't been writing for very long, so no pressure to start with this style of title, but a few examples: Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, You Are Eating an Orange, You Are Naked Naked by Shun King. There's so much about this title that you have to love. You are eating an orange, but you're not expecting you are naked. I mean, you're eating an orange. Okay, sometimes we eat oranges, but you are naked. Wow. Pairing those two things together is not something that I'm expecting. It's super specific. It's painting a very specific image. Lullabies for Little Criminals by Heather O'Neill. And then another one of mine, Where to Run When the Lamb Roars. It sounds kind of like me. They're longer. You can see they're more in line with writing style and kind of your quirks as a writer. At the end of the day, titles are a unique mix of your book, your writer's style, and a lot of luck. Practice is the best way to consistently write good titles. So here's a challenge for you. If you made it to the end of this video and you'd like to increase your titling skills, try to come up with 10 book titles over the next month. They don't all have to be good. Some of them can just be one word. Some of them can be the worst title you've ever heard. It really doesn't matter. Just write 10 of them. And then at the end of this month, delete the terrible ones or the ones you really don't like. Revise the better ones, so the ones that you think have potential, and then hold on to the good ones. Repeat for the next month or so. And I think this would be a really great way to just continue getting that title muscle going. Let me know your favorite titles for books or short stories, poems in the comments. I'd love to hear them, but thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.